The cardboard box looks ordinary at first glance, the kind of thing you'd expect to see in any police storage room, stacked among thousands of others. But on the side, in black marker and faded labels, sit words that have haunted America for decades. Ramsey, homicide, Boulder PD. The box has weight far beyond its paper and ink. Inside are the fragments of a story that refuses to settle, pages and photos and forms that together claim to hold everything officially known about the death of a 6-year-old girl in a Colorado home the day after Christmas. When the lid comes off, the first impression is chaos disguised as order. Manila folders packed tight, tabs sticking out at angles, some crisp and new, others softened by time. On top is a case summary, a few clean pages that attempt the impossible, reducing a nightmare into neat paragraphs, dates and times. It lays out the skeleton: December 26, 1996. Reported kidnapping, ransom note, search, discovery of the body in the basement. It is clinical, stripped of emotion, as if the horror can be contained in lines of type. Beneath that summary, the file splits like a tree into multiple thick branches. There are uniformed officer reports written in rushed capital letters, interviews with neighbors, logs from detectives, lab results, and transcriptions of calls. Tabs labeled Scene, Family, Suspects, DNA, and Media jut out, each promising a different angle on the same tragedy. Some documents are photocopies of photocopies, gray and barely readable, while others are crisp, added years later as the case refused to die. Scattered through the folders are photographs. The outside of the Ramsey home in winter, police cars lined up at the curb, yellow tape and news vans crowding the street. The images are familiar from television and magazines, but inside the case file, they are arranged with deliberate, unemotional purpose. Each photo has a reference number, a date, a description. The visual noise of media coverage is stripped away. These pictures aren't for headlines, they are for evidence. As the pages are turned, another truth emerges. This is not just a single investigation frozen in time. It is a palimpsest of many investigations layered on top of one another. Early notes from 1996 sit beside reviews from the 2000s, and later cold case summaries from yet another generation of detectives. Different handwriting styles, different fonts, different shades of ink. Together they tell a parallel story of changing theories, new technologies, and shifting priorities inside the department. And yet, for all the volume, there are gaps you can almost feel, places where the paper trail seems to stop just short of an answer, where a question is raised but never resolved in the text that follows. The weight of the case file doesn't come only from what's inside, but from what isn't. Before names, theories, and science, it begins with this simple act: a box opened on a table, and a decision to go back to page 1 and read it all again. The first real heartbeat of the case file is not a photograph or a lab result, but a transcript. On white paper, double-spaced, the words of the 911 call are laid out in black ink, capturing the raw panic of a voice on the other end of the line in the early hours of December 26th. The lines are broken into caller, dispatcher, time markers. At the top is the cold metadata: date, time received, response units dispatched. Below that, in plain text, is the sound of a mother pleading for help. The dispatch logs that follow translate that fear into procedure. Unit numbers, call signs, and arrival times march down the page in neat columns. Officer en route. Arrived on scene. Cleared. To someone reading them years later, they seem almost mechanical, but each line represents a car pulling up to the curb, a door opening, footsteps crunching on frozen ground as officers climbed the front steps of a house that looked like any other in the neighborhood. What the logs can't capture is what they felt as they stepped inside. Initial officer narratives begin to color in the outlines left by the logs. Written in hurried script or typed into forms, they describe a scene already in motion. Frantic parents, a ransom note spread out on a staircase, relatives moving through the home, friends gathering to support the family. The house is not quiet and locked down. It is active, alive with people, voices, movement. The officers observing all this are supposed to secure a crime scene, but in those early minutes, they are still operating under the belief that a child has been kidnapped and might be saved. On some pages, there are small notations about unusual things an officer noticed: a door slightly ajar, a window that looked off, the position of certain objects. None of them know which details will matter yet. In the margin of one report, a single line stands out: An officer's later reflection on how many people were inside that house before anyone realized they were standing in the middle of something more than a kidnapping. These are the seeds of later criticism, but in the file they exist simply as observations. Hours pass in the timeline before a new type of report appears, one that changes everything. The discovery of the body in the basement is recorded in language strained by the need for both accuracy and distance. An officer describes walking down the stairs, entering a room, seeing a small form. Measurements are noted, positions described, items nearby listed. The word homicide begins to appear where just pages earlier, the focus had been on kidnap and hostage. By the time the sun is rising over Boulder, the first day of the investigation is already being frozen into these documents. The 911 call, the dispatch logs, the initial officer reports. Together they show not only what was done, but how quickly the situation evolved from a possible abduction to a murder scene. Later, these same pages will be reviewed with a harsher eye, dissected for mistakes and missed opportunities. But in the chronology of the case file, they remain what they always were. The moment when everything began. Nestled in a clear evidence sleeve and reproduced in multiple photocopies, the ransom note sits at the center of the case file like a riddle that refuses to be solved. It is long, far longer than most notes of its kind, sprawling across 2.5 pages of lined paper. The handwriting is uneven, the block letters shifting in size and pressure. In the transcript versions, the content is converted into clean type, but the unease lingers in the words themselves. A demand for a strangely specific sum of money, references to a small foreign faction, phrases that sound almost cinematic in their drama. Early analyses of the note, attached as separate reports, circle the same anomalies. Investigators underline the amount demanded, $118,000, and make note of its striking similarity to a recent work-related bonus. They point out passages that seem excessively wordy, as if the writer was stalling for time or trying too hard to sound a certain way. In some reports, there are suggestions that phrases or patterns echo movies or books, though nothing is stated with absolute certainty. On the page, these thoughts are cautious, qualified, but they suggest a growing suspicion. This is not a typical ransom note. Forensic document examiners add another layer to the file. Their reports are technical, full of terms describing pressure, slant, letter formation, spacing. Samples of known handwriting from people in the household and others connected to the case are compared side by side. Charts are created, with certain letters isolated and enlarged, arrows pointing out similarities or differences. Some findings lean in one direction, others in another. The examiners stop short of definitive attribution, leaving the note hovering in a limbo between consistent with and not conclusive. The physical origin of the note is documented as well. Reports describe how the paper and pen used to create it appear to have come from inside the house, not brought in from outside. That detail is circled, highlighted, revisited in later summaries. It raises questions that echo through the rest of the file. If an intruder wrote it, where in the home did they sit? How long did they stay? How could they have spent that much time inside without being noticed? Each time the question is asked, the pages that follow fail to provide a satisfying answer. Despite all these efforts, the note remains stubbornly opaque. Different sections of the file treat it as different things. An authentic message from a kidnapper, a staged attempt to mislead investigators, a hybrid of truth and performance. The words themselves don't change, but the interpretations do, depending on the era, the detective, and the prevailing theory of the moment. The case file becomes less an autopsy of the note and more a mirror reflecting the biases and hopes of whoever is reading it. In the end, the ransom note stands as both a piece of evidence and a symbol of everything that makes this case so difficult. It is a physical object linked to the crime scene, carefully preserved and examined with every tool available, and yet it never yields the definitive insight everyone is looking for. Inside the box, it is just paper and ink. In the minds of those who study it, it is a constant reminder that not every question can be answered by simply reading harder. To understand what happened inside the Ramsey home, the case file invites the reader to walk its halls, but not in person. Instead, the path is laid out through floor plans, crime scene sketches, and careful diagrams that turn a real house into lines on paper. One sheet shows the main floor, rooms labeled in neat capitals. Another sheet shows the second floor with bedrooms, bathrooms, and hallways. And then there is the basement, drawn from above but weighted with the knowledge of what was found there. On the main floor plans, small arrows mark the intended flow of movement for officers and investigators. Doors are indicated with sweeping arcs, windows with small rectangular symbols. Certain locations are numbered, corresponding to evidence logs in another section of the file. You can see where the note was discovered, where phone calls were made, where people gathered. The house becomes less of a home and more of a stage, with positions and props carefully plotted. The upper floor plans carry a different emotional weight. These are the private spaces, bedrooms and bathrooms, closets and hallways. Some diagrams include notations about where people said they were sleeping that night, which doors were closed, which lights were on. In the sterile language of the diagrams, there is an undercurrent of something deeply personal, a family's most intimate spaces reduced to dimensions and labels in an evidence folder. The basement diagrams are the most haunting. Here, the lines and angles outline a room that no one expected to become the center of a homicide investigation. The placement of the body is indicated with a simple shape, a symbol rather than an image, to distance the reader from the reality of what occurred, yet that symbol carries more weight than any photograph could. Arrows mark the path taken by the person who discovered her. Notes in the margins mention objects nearby, coverings, ligatures. It is clinical and devastating at the same time. Accompanying the floor plans are rough sketches made by officers and detectives in the early hours and days of the case. These lack the precise scale of the later diagrams, but offer something else, a glimpse into how the scene was first perceived in real time. A hastily drawn window here, a scribbled staircase there with quick labels like wine cellar, storage, and door locked, unlocked. Over time, these sketches are superseded by more polished diagrams, but they remain in the file, preserved like first impressions in a notebook no one wants to throw away. Taken together, these documents allow someone sitting miles and years away to mentally move through the house step by step. You can trace the route from the front door to the kitchen, from the bedrooms to the basement, imagining the angles of sight, the blind spots, the distances between rooms. But for all their detail, the plans and sketches can only show where things were, not why. They reveal the layout of the physical space, but they cannot map the choices, fears, and impulses that turned an ordinary house into the most scrutinized crime scene in America. In one thick section of the case file, the investigation feels less like a narrative and more like a catalog. Pages list names, relationships, alibis, and notes about interviews conducted and follow-up required. It begins with the obvious: the people who lived in the house, those who were closest to the victim. Their statements are transcribed, their timelines charted, their behaviors observed and interpreted. Early reports often reflect a common pattern in homicide work. Start with the inner circle and move outward. As the months and years progress, the suspect lists expand. Neighbors, friends, family friends, contractors, anyone with a reason to be near the house is added to the file. Some entries are short and quickly crossed off, the word cleared handwritten in the margin. Others generate entire subfolders with multiple interviews, background checks, and comparative analyses. In a few cases, there are notes of public suspicion fueled by media coverage, reminders that the court of public opinion is always noisier than the one marked in legal documents. Inside the file, you can see the tension between two dominant theories pulling at the investigation. On one side, documents focus on the family, detailing inconsistencies, emotional responses, and forensic interpretations that some believe point inward. On the other side, other reports concentrate on the idea of an intruder, documenting possible points of entry, prior incidents in the area, and individuals with criminal histories who might fit a vague profile. Rather than cleanly resolving this tension, the file preserves it. Different eras of the investigation seem to lean in different directions. Psychological and behavioral profiles add another dimension. Reports from specialists outline what kind of offender might be responsible for a crime like this, based on known patterns and evidence. Some elements of the profile appear to fit someone outside the family, others could describe someone within. These profiles are written in general terms, careful not to name names, but in context they inevitably influence how certain suspects are viewed in later interviews and decisions. One of the most striking things in this section is how often names reappear. Individuals who were initially interviewed and set aside are later revisited as new information or new interpretations bring them back into focus. Marginal notes like "See 2001 follow-up" or "Re-interviewed in 2010" appear next to entries that might otherwise have been forgotten. The file becomes a record not just of who was considered, but of how enduring certain suspicions can be, even without definitive proof. There is no page where a simple stamp declares "true offender identified." Instead, the suspect lists and profiles end in a state of uneasy plurality. Multiple theories coexist in the same binder, backed by different sets of documents and favored by different people at different times. On paper, the investigation is thorough and persistent. In reality, the absence of a clear resolution hangs over every line, turning the suspect section into a testament to both the effort invested and the answer still missing. Most homicide files do not devote much space to newspapers and television shows. In this one, they occupy their own folders. Clippings from local and national outlets are glued or stapled to sheets of paper, annotated in margins, and sometimes attached to internal memos discussing their impact. Early headlines use words like mystery, wealthy family, and beauty queen, framing the case in ways that will echo for decades. The language is dramatic, sometimes sensational, and it spills into living rooms far beyond Boulder. As media interest explodes, the case file records how the investigation and publicity begin to loop around one another. Press releases issued by the police are included and time-stamped, revealing what information investigators chose to share and when. Transcripts of televised statements by family members and law enforcement are printed out and filed, creating an official archive of words spoken in front of cameras. Each public statement becomes both a communication tool and a piece of evidence in how the narrative evolved. Some internal documents note concerns about leaks, speculation, and misinformation. Memos discuss the strain between the desire to protect the integrity of the investigation and the pressure to respond to intense public curiosity. In a few places, investigators reference specific television programs or talk show segments that aired theories or allegations not supported by the evidence. These references are brief and understated, but they hint at frustration, at how a case can start to live a second life outside the control of those charged with solving it. The file also captures the shift in tone over time. Early coverage is dominated by shock and sympathy. Later stories lean into controversy, conflict, and doubt. Articles questioning the competence of police, the behavior of the family, or the motives of prosecutors are clipped and tucked into the folders. These pieces are not evidence in the traditional sense, but they are treated as relevant context, showing the environment in which decisions were made and reputations were shaped. In some late-stage reports, there are references to spikes in tips and calls following the release of documentaries, books, or special television episodes. Tip logs show flurries of new leads in the days after a major broadcast, many of them quickly dismissed, some cautiously followed up. The media, in these instances, functions both as an amplifier of noise and an occasional generator of signal, forcing the case back into public consciousness and, sometimes, back onto a detective's desk. By preserving these clippings and transcripts alongside forensic reports and interview notes, the case file acknowledges a reality of modern high-profile crime. The investigation does not unfold in a vacuum, it unfolds under a spotlight. The headlines and broadcasts become part of the story, influencing witnesses, shaping jurors' preconceptions, and altering the emotional landscape of everyone involved. In this box, the media is not just a background chorus. It is one more force pulling at the fragile threads of an already tangled case. For years, this case lived mostly on paper, statements, diagrams, photographs. Then, slowly, lines of numbers and letters began to appear that changed how everyone talked about it. DNA reports enter the case file like a new language. At first, they are short, cautious, reflecting the limits of technology at the time. They note samples collected, items tested, and whether anything usable was recovered. The early results are inconclusive, suggestive but not transformative. As the timeline moves forward, the reports grow more detailed. Advances in forensic science allow analysts to re-examine items that had been stored for years. Clothing, undergarments, and other evidentiary materials are subjected to newer techniques. In some of these documents, a phrase recurs with increasing clarity, indications of an unknown male profile. Charts list genetic markers, loci, and probabilities. This profile does not match the known samples from family members, a fact that is underlined, boxed, and revisited in later summaries. Each lab document is careful, hedged with scientific language and qualifiers. Analysts describe the handling of samples, the potential for contamination, and the statistical significance of the results. They explain which findings are robust and which must be interpreted with caution. In the margins of some internal memos, detectives jot their own thoughts. Arrows connecting phrases like unknown male DNA to existing theories about an intruder. The science does not dictate a story, but it nudges the narrative in certain directions. As more reports accumulate, the presence of the unidentified male becomes one of the central pillars of many modern interpretations of the case. Review summaries written years after the crime devote entire sections to DNA, tracing how the evidence evolved from vague to specific. They note that the profile appears consistent across multiple items, strengthening the argument that it is not simply the result of random transfer. But even as the profile solidifies, it remains a shadow, a set of numbers with no name attached. The absence of a direct match is recorded with equal care. Searches in databases yield no confirmed identity for the unknown contributor. Requests for further testing, additional submissions to labs, and discussions of potential new methods appear in the file as small hopes pinned to evolving technology. Some later reports mention the possibility of genetic genealogy, the emerging technique that would go on to solve other cold cases, and speculate about whether it could one day be applied here. In the structure of the case file, the DNA sections stand as both progress and limitation. They offer a concrete piece of information that did not exist in 1996, a profile that rules some people out and suggests the presence of someone else. At the same time, they highlight the gap between what can be known biologically and what can be proven legally. On paper, the unknown male is as real as any named suspect. In the world outside the file, he is still invisible. Beyond the crime scene photos and lab reports, the case file contains another kind of document, legal paperwork that records moments when the investigation crossed into the formal arena of potential charges. Among these pages are summaries related to a grand jury, written in careful, neutral language that hints at debates the public never fully heard. These documents outline what evidence was presented, what legal standards were applied, and how close the case came, if it ever did, to producing indictments. Memos from the district attorney's office add further layers. Some are short and direct, conveying decisions about whether to move forward with charges, whether to convene panels, or whether to seek additional investigative work. Others are longer, almost essay-like, weighing the strengths and weaknesses of the available evidence. They reference witness credibility, forensic limitations, and the potential impact of intense media scrutiny on any future trial. Each memo is dated, placed in context, and filed away, turning private deliberations into historical artifacts. In several places, the file reflects friction between investigators and prosecutors. Notes from meetings and emails, summarized in internal documents, show differing views on whether the case was trial-ready at various points in time. Police reports emphasize the cumulative weight of years of work, while legal memos stress the necessity of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The divide is not between people who care and people who don't. It is between different roles in a system that demands certainty in a case built on complexity. There are also moments in the file where important developments are recorded almost quietly. A line noting that a grand jury has been convened. Another line, months later, summarizing the outcome without fanfare. No bold headlines, no dramatic language, just the calm, factual notation of a process that has immense implications for everyone involved. These understated entries force anyone reading the file to read between the lines, to sense the weight of what is being described without flourish. Some documents explain why certain legal paths were not taken. They cite concerns about jury bias in a case so saturated with publicity. They mention the challenges of presenting contradictory expert testimonies, the risk of appearing divided in front of a jury, the possibility that a failed prosecution would shut the door on future options. These rationales are set down in formal prose, but they carry the emotional undercurrent of people trying to choose between flawed options with no guarantee of justice at the end. By the time this section of the file ends, there is no decisive legal resolution to point to. The grand jury documents and DA memos provide context, explanation, and sometimes controversy but not closure. They show that the case did not simply languish in a drawer. It was argued over, evaluated, and revisited at the highest levels. Yet for all the paper and ink, the final decision recorded again and again is a kind of stalemate. Not enough, not yet, not this way, Years after the original investigation, new covers are added to the old folders, labeled with terms like Cold Case Review and Task Force Summary. These documents are written in a different voice, more reflective, more structured, conscious of reviewing not just a crime, but the entire history of how it has been handled. They begin by summarizing what is known, but their real purpose is to ask what has been missed and what can be done now that could not be done before. Teams assembled for these reviews comb back through the same evidence, but with updated tools and a fresh set of eyes. Their reports often include checklists, items to be retested with newer DNA methods, witnesses to be re-interviewed, new databases to search. Some recommendations are straightforward, like verifying whether all physical evidence is properly preserved. Others are more ambitious, suggesting engagement with external experts, specialized labs, or even technology that wasn't widely accessible a decade prior. Intertwined with these technical suggestions are broader reflections on investigative strategy. Cold case summaries sometimes acknowledge missteps from the early days, scenes not fully secured, interviews that may have been too leading or too lenient, avenues that were prematurely closed. They do so with a careful tone, critical but not accusatory, aware that the people whose work is being evaluated were operating under intense pressure and with fewer tools than are available now. The influence of developments in other cases is clear in these later documents. References to breakthroughs in genetic genealogy, to high-profile cold cases solved in other states, and to evolving best practices in evidence handling signal a growing sense that even long stagnant cases can move again. In the margin of one recommendation, there might be a brief note about exploring partnerships with outside agencies or private labs known for advanced analysis, a quiet acknowledgement that fresh possibilities exist outside the traditional boundaries. Tip logs and lead sheets attached to these reviews tell their own story. After renewed media attention or new documentaries, waves of information come in, from sincere recollections to far-fetched theories. Each tip is logged, categorized, sometimes followed up, often dismissed, but the act of cataloging them shows that the case is still alive in the public's mind. The cold case teams must sift through this new noise while looking for a signal the original investigators might not have been able to detect. Despite the length and detail of these modern reviews, they end much like the earlier reports, with recommendations, not resolutions. The language speaks of potential, further exploration, and future developments. There is a sense of motion, but not yet arrival. Still, the existence of these documents adds a new layer to the file. It proves that the case has not been formally closed, that even decades later, people are still opening the box, reading the pages, and searching for the one piece of paper or one technological leap that might finally tip the balance. After hours spent paging through reports, diagrams, transcripts, clippings, and memos, a strange realization settles in. The case file is enormous, but the story it tells is still incomplete. The gaps are not always obvious. They hide in unanswered questions at the end of an interview, in references to evidence that was never fully tested, in decisions hinted at but not fully explained. If you stack every piece of paper on the table, what remains most visible are the empty spaces between them. Some of those spaces are temporal. There are stretches of time in the timeline where very little is formally recorded, periods when the investigation was quieter, or when work was done that never made its way into a report detailed enough to survive in the file. Other gaps are about perspective. The documents capture what people said happened, but they can never fully capture what they thought, felt, or feared at the time. Statements are frozen versions of memories that may have already been blurred by shock. There are also contradictions preserved without reconciliation. Two witnesses might recall the same moment differently. Two experts might interpret the same piece of evidence in opposite ways. Both perspectives live side by side in the folders, rarely forced into a definitive hierarchy. The file does not choose one over the other. It simply holds them. To anyone reading, this can be unsettling. We are used to official records converging toward a single coherent truth. Here, they often do not. In the later review documents, some of these unresolved points are acknowledged explicitly. Lists of open questions appear in internal summaries. Why was this action taken and not that one? Why was a certain test never performed? What explains an inconsistency between two key statements? These questions are not rhetorical. They are written by people who have spent years immersed in the file and still find themselves staring at blank spaces that no amount of rereading will fill. Outside the box, the case has spawned countless theories, some thoughtful, others reckless. Inside the box, there are no theories, only the raw materials from which they are constructed. That is both the strength and the limitation of the case file. It protects the facts as they were recorded, but it cannot on its own transform them into certainty. It is possible to read every page and still walk away with more than one plausible story in mind. In the end, closing the case file feels very different from closing a case. The lid goes back on the box. The folders are returned to their place. On the spine, the same labels stare back, unchanged. The documents inside represent decades of effort by officers, analysts, lawyers, and experts, and yet the most important entry is the one that does not exist. The page that names a killer, records a confession, or describes a conviction. Until that page is written, if it ever is, the file remains what it has been for nearly 3 decades. A map with no clear destination, a story still missing its final chapter.